Hi guys, this is Jess with Lights of Recovery, and this is where we talk about this is a not so serious podcast about serious things, I guess you could say. And we really like to focus on the recovery from all kinds of different things. And with me today is Ashley, and you know what? How do you say your last name, Ashley?
Fruk Siomos. So it's two parts. Fruk Siomos.
Fruk Siomos.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Well, Ashley's here with us today, and she's going to talk about her recovery journey. Now, some would probably consider this like, oh my God, that's so unprofessional. But I don't look up anything about you guys before the interview because I want to go in like, we are just now meeting. We are new friends. Surprise, we're friends now. And we're just going to talk about your story. And all of my questions are just going to be, pretty authentic in the moment. So all of that said, no pressure, but what is your overall story? What is your recovery element?
Okay. So I guess for me, it was with alcohol, right? So my issues were with alcohol, and
Relatable.
yeah. And it's like the way that I look at it, I'd say it kind of started the first time I had a drink. Like I remember that first time very, very clearly.
Really? How old were you?
I was probably 15.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was young, and I remember like just feeling normal for the first time. It was as if like all these voices in my head were shut off, all that like constant like what am I going to do next, and like all of probably what I know now was like thoughts around like OCD and anxiety and all those pieces like quieted, and I was like,
Yes. And you're probably like, is this what it's like to be normal?
right,
For like regular people? I've been out here playing on hard mode, and this
right.
is like, excuse me? Yeah. Okay.
And I was like, this is an amazing way to live. Like, I could do this, like, for, So, anyways, but obviously early on, it did not get to the point that it did eventually. And so, early on, it was just social drinking, right? Like in my teenage years, it was binge drinking on the weekends, like everyone else. And so it was really hard to ever know that there was any sort of an issue because of the environments I was in. That's just the way
Sure.
everyone
You
was
you were
conceived.
doing what your peers were doing. So, it was like, so was it like an every weekend kind of thing? Was it that often, or was it not even that often, or no judgment here?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
just
I'd
painting a
say
picture.
No, I'd say by the time I was, like, in high school, like, maybe grade 10, 11, it was every weekend. Like, that's just how we spent our weekends.
But it was, all your friends were doing it kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
Yep.
And then that continued. It continued into, like, college, university, and again, like, all my friends were consuming in that same way. And then it really wasn't until all of a sudden, like, we all graduated, everyone had, like, big boy, big girl jobs. Some people were starting families, like, so things started to shift and change a
Mm,
bit. And then the drinking scene wasn't as it was initially. And so people kind of started falling off. But I was always the person like, hey, what are we doing Friday? What are we doing Saturday? Like, I still wanted to go out and drink. And again, even still at that point, like, it was really hard to know that there's any sort of an issue because
right.
I just thought, like, okay, well, their lifestyle is changing, but I want to continue to do this. And I had enough people that also wanted to continue with me that it, again, didn't really seem like an issue.
Well, it sounds like you were also, like a lot of us do, like compartmentalizing it to the weekends and like, oh, this is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know for me, like for a while, it was sort of this like reward system, like, oh, I worked hard all week. I deserve this, And so like it's your sort of cut loose thing. And like it's, even if you don't get addicted or deal with actual, alcohol use disorder, you can absolutely fall into an alcohol abuse issue even if you don't struggle with addiction because of this socially accepted, we're going to go out on Friday and Saturday, and then it's just this cycle.
Exactly. And that was me, like, to the T, in that, like, I was doing really well career-wise, right? Like, I had gotten a pretty good corporate job early on. I was pretty young. I also excelled really quickly in that. So, like, externally, everything looked like everything was going really well. Like, I ended
Yeah.
up getting into like a long-term relationship with a great person. I had the corporate job. I had all the things. And so
You had it all. Ashley had it all, but you're here, so obviously it didn't stay great.
right. And so yeah, and so exactly that. So like that just continued for so long. And then it wasn't until I'd say so around like COVID time, around early 2020, it's like always, I know. So for me, what happened was that early 2020, a few things happened all at once. And so COVID hit.
Mhm.
I'd been in a relationship for 7 years and engaged for 5 of those, and we broke up. We lost
Oh.
3 friends suddenly, so they had all passed away in like very kind of traumatic ways.
Oh gosh, I'm
My
so sorry.
grandmother passed away as well, and so it was just for me like everything at once. And up until that point in my life, I had lived a pretty like what I had not realized, but like an easy-ish life, right? Like challenges came up, but they were enough that I could manage them.
But these were true tragedies, like, punch you in the emotional gut. Yeah.
Yeah. And like with the breakup, because I had left him, I went to my brother's house at first, just kind of think like, oh, maybe we just need some space. And so now I was in a completely different environment, felt like I was intruding on my brother. I had like one box of my belongings and that was it. And it was just this weird time in my life. And I was like, I genuinely don't know how to deal with all of these emotions. And I was just so sad and crying all the time. The only thing I knew to turn to was alcohol, and not that I had necessarily used it to cope with emotions in the past, but I think culturally there is enough in the world that told me like if you break up with someone or you go through a hard time, like have whatever, a
Yeah,
few
have a drink about it, you know?
right. And a few drinks very, very quickly turned into like a lot of drinking every single day of the week and all day. Um
And
and
it was
so
COVID, so everything's shut down, you're already in isolation. Like,
yep,
talk about what an unmooring experience for
yeah,
you, where it's the world is just flipped upside down. I can relate very, very strongly to this. We're the entire world is shut down and everything just feels like chaos. And you're not even staying in your home. You're missing this anchor person that's been part of your life for a very long time.
yeah.
You also are dealing with grief and tragedy. You mentioned losing your grandmother. I assume you guys were very close.
We had yeah, we were, yeah.
My I lost my grandmother January 1st of 2020, and that's what sent me into my drinking spiral. So, like, I get it. Like, I tale as old as time, the grief drinking. And I don't again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but for me, I know my experience in 2020 for sure
Yeah,
was like, nothing matters. Screw it, nothing matters. Like, I'm just gonna drink. And it turned into this like compulsion thing where there's an element of self-loathing. There was an element of, just hide from it, just shut it off
yeah,
and numb myself. And then there was also just kind of this element of like, this isn't forever, but like the world's on fire. Everything feels weird and almost like not real.
yes,
So I just kept drinking every day.
exactly, and yes, and so many other people were too, right? I still see memes to this day, and it's like, the meme, it's like, "Oh, it's Friday at 3 p.m. at like, in COVID times, let's crack open a bottle of wine." Like,
Honestly, yes.
that's what everyone was doing, and so it was also, like, so normalized as well to some extent, and then to your point, it's like, I mean, I wasn't having to, like, do a crazy commute every day, and, like, I didn't have the same sort of responsibilities that would sober me up before, right? Like, it's like, "Okay, it's Monday, I have this, like, commute, and I have all this work to do," and that kind of, like, faded, and so then this just became so easy. And no one was around me. Like, yeah, I was living in the same place as my brother, but like he was doing his own thing and I was doing mine. And so I could really get away with like consuming all that alcohol without anyone knowing. And I became very good at hiding it. Like I could act
Mm,
sober, right, around people and they would have no idea that I was like 10 drinks in, at like
wow.
2 p.m. Yeah, and like it got to a point for me where I drank a lot and I'm a small person, like I'm 5 feet tall.
Oh,
And
wow.
so when everything kind of came to a head, at that point I had been drinking like, I don't know, like upwards of like I drink like 12 beers and like 12 shots of whatever, like that's like over 20 drinks in a day. I
Dude, yes, that's a lot.
a lot. And
Were you
yeah.
were you experiencing, like what side effects started cropping up for you? What did you notice? Anything or
So this is the weird thing for me, like, I didn't really notice anything except for, like, crippling anxiety and guilt, and then, like, I was waking up feeling lower and lower and lower every day, and then my energy because when I'm drinking, I don't eat food, like, I just don't have a stomach for food, so then I was, like, losing so much weight, plus just grief, right? Like, the
yeah.
grief itself I didn't wanna eat, and so here I was consuming all this alcohol, and then I had lost all this weight. And so my energy levels, I remember trying to go for like a walk around the block and be like, I can't do this. It's like, it's too exhausting for me.
Wow.
Um, but it was the mental piece. Like I remember waking up, and again, I remember this very clearly, like one morning, and that guilt and that anxiety, and thinking like it was literally a crossroad that I came to in my life. And it was like, if I continue to do this and consume alcohol this way, like it will kill me. So I have two choices. I can continue down this road, but I know where that's going to lead, or I can stop drinking and see like something's got to give, like something's got to improve
Yep.
this mental state of mine. And I had committed, and I have very strong like willpower, which we know doesn't take you through like the long term journey, but it did get me started. And so I committed that morning when I woke up feeling like that, like for the next 3 months, I'm going to not drink alcohol, meditate every day, and do yoga every day. And I did.
Wow.
And I just did it.
Really?
Yeah.
So how far into 2020 was this?
So this was October. So
Okay, sick.
October 2020. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. Okay,
Yeah.
well done. And so then you committed, why 3 months? Just
So I was reading a book on meditation by, I'm going to say his name wrong, Thich Nhat Hanh.
yes, I love him. Which book?
She's so good. And so he, I think, had said, like, if you do anything for 3 months, it becomes
Yes.
this habit, and that's when you'll start to notice change and things like that, right?
Do
He
you
was
remember
referring to
do you remember
meditation.
which book it was?
It was the purple one. I don't know. I
Oh,
have
yeah,
a yellow one too, which I
I
think is
do too. I have a couple of his. I believe it's how do you say it? I'm sure someone's watching this and is gonna be like, "This is how you say it, you fools." So, put it down in the comments phonetically if you can help us. Um, Thich Nhat Hanh? Thich Nhat Hanh?
something like that.
Something like that, but yes, phenomenal. So, yeah, if anybody's watching and you're looking for any type of getting into Zen, meditation, mindfulness, any of that, any of his books, let me make myself a note so that I remember to put this down in the description, but he's phenomenal. So anyway, so you read this book. Why were you reading the book? Just because?
So I think I had enough like self-awareness to know like I am a human being going through a really hard time right now, like with all of the things I had gone through. And I've never gone through all of these things, and especially at once. And so, like,
Seriously.
I knew I needed help, and I couldn't source that help. Like, everything was shut down. I didn't have friends to go hang out with and talk to. I didn't want to burden anyone like over the phone. I didn't want to keep on going to my family also was really sad for me, and I could tell like it broke their heart just to look at me because
Mm,
of like the sadness that was like so evident. And so like I really just knew I needed to kind of do this myself. And I was taught tools growing up. Like I had been meditating since I was very little.
really?
Like
That's
my
lovely.
dad taught us these type of things. And so that and then reading. And so I just like even though I was still drinking, I started doing that research. I joined therapy for the first time. And so I was kind of and I think this is important for anyone that's starting this journey is that like you can start the journey while you're still drinking. You know what I mean? And then at some point things will pivot and change and then you'll like put away the drinking and that's what I did.
Yes.
But
That's a great point. I want to pause there because that's incredibly important. A lot of people it feels very overwhelming because you have this lifestyle that you have adapted and it could include, hobbies and habits and people and friends and it's all what you're used to and then if you want to really dive into the psychology of it, some of us become comfortable with the chaos of it because it's familiar at least. And then, you think to yourself, I know I need to stop, but when you really think about what that means, there is a loss of a lot of things potentially.
Yep.
And there's also, it's a huge change
Mm,
versus what you just said. If you know that this is not working, you can get started on your journey in small pieces. You don't have to do this huge, profound, okay, I've quit drinking, I quit vaping, I have stopped hanging out with my friends that are a bad influence, I've, started meditating, I now eat clean, like it's just,
yeah.
that's a lot of stuff if you try and make a list of it. But
Yeah.
starting somewhere is you're doing something, you're moving in the right direction. And I think that gets so overlooked, but like what a good point to make.
Well, and just to expand on what you just said, because something that was really important for me was, so I kind of coined this term eventually where I called it sobriety burnout, because after the 3 months, what I did was I went like full tilt into sobriety. And I had discovered online communities like Zoom meetings. It wasn't AA, but it was like a similar concept. We would meet, we talk about recovery, things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Hey, we don't like shame any particular method. So like AA
yeah.
is great. If it works for you, lovely. If you find something else, lovely. Was it smart recovery by chance?
No, and so like a lot of the folks in these Zoom meetings were like AA members or
Oh,
part of
okay.
Smart Recovery, and so we discussed all those things. But this was from, so I joined this app called iamsober, and initially I joined
Oh,
just as like a day counter. And very quickly I realized like there's a whole community here. And that
mm,
community was hosting Zoom meetings. And I'm like, oh, I want to connect with these people because I don't know anyone in my like whole network that is sober. So I need to meet
right.
sober people. And so I did. And through that, like one thing that I didn't realize early on is that everyone's so eager to help like a newcomer and has all the advice in the world or suggestions. And the problem with me is like I'll do everything because like I just wanted like change. Like I needed change. But I did everything. And after a year of like sobriety and doing all the like reading all the books, listening to all the podcasts, joining all the meetings, like I was exhausted.
Sure.
It was too much. And so if I was to go back and do that part again, what I would say or like to myself is try everything once. Like read a book, listen to a podcast, figure out the things that make the most sense for you, and then keep what works and let go of everything else, because otherwise it will cause like sobriety burnout. And like I did that full year and then I relapsed because I was so exhausted. Like
Oh,
that's no
wow. I was
live.
gonna I was gonna ask without, putting you
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
spot, hopefully, but also a great time to mention relapse doesn't mean that the treatment's not working. It doesn't mean you're a failure. And it's also not something you should necessarily plan for, right? Because we want to keep a positive mindset, but it
Yep.
happens, man. I know lots of people who've been sober for many years that have a relapse, at least one, um, under their belt. And actually, I don't know if you've seen one of the early episodes of the Addiction Help podcast. Why are my dogs barking right now? Please stop. They're advertising the Addiction Help podcast. They love it. So one of the episodes was with Leah is her name, and she talked about how in her experience she had relapsed 3 different times over the course of several years,
Mhm.
and it took her a while to really get that good foundation and that confidence and that full willpower. And now she's been sober for many years,
Yep.
and we talked about also like if you slip up, keeping it a slip and not a slide. Where if you relapse and you return to whatever that habit or addiction is,
Mhm.
you recognize it and you don't, beat yourself up too much and decide, well, I'm stuck here. And so I guess I might as well just stay here for as long as whatever. And then, you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
turn it back around. You can get back up. You've not ruined anything. It's a slip, not a slide.
Yeah, and just like for me in the 4 years that I've been on this journey, I've had a few relapses. And yeah, like never felt overly bad about them. Like they weren't great. They didn't make me feel really good at all. They basically spiraled pretty quickly, and then also just
Mm.
put me in like a really low, like maybe a bit of a depression. Like it's just it. Yeah, and for me, at each time was definitely a lesson. And I think it was testing the water a bit too. Like, I think for me, there was still this bit of this narrative where it's like, well, did I ever really have a problem, or was I just going through a really hard time?
Hey, and I think that's a perfectly valid question to ask yourself
Yeah.
because you're still self-examining. Because for some of us, we need to just re-examine our relationship with alcohol or with substance or, even with um, behavioral things like gambling, exercise, whatever. And so I think that's valid is you're questioning, was I just having a hard time and using this particular thing as a coping mechanism? Or is this particular thing, the way my brain works, just going to lead me down a dark path?
And it
And
was
I
the
th- that's
later. Yeah.
aha.
'Cause I tried, so I try like, I went and I tried and I was like, "Okay, maybe I don't have a problem," but, like, to your point, like, they were slips, they weren't super long periods of relapse, but they, like, very, very quickly got to a point where it's like, "This is not normal, this," like, something goes off in my brain and everything changes. Um,
Interesting.
and, like, I think for me, like, one thing I've definitely learned through this whole journey is that I definitely have, like, pretty bad OCD, and it's like my drinking and my OCD kind of happen, like, in parallel in that, like, as soon as I start anything I do in my life, like, and I know this is very, common for the addict, but, like, anything that I do in my life, I do 110%. Like, if I'm swimming, like, I'm not going swimming for 30 minutes, I'm going for 2 hours and I'm gonna crush it. So, like, like, any sort of
Well,
workout.
even your sobriety, it sounds like you went
Oh,
in
yeah.
like, I'm going to be the most sober person that has ever sobered in the history of sobriety. And then it just, burned you out.
Yes. And so it's the same with drinking. Like, if I'm gonna drink, I'm gonna drink. Like, I'm not gonna just have a couple drinks.
Oh.
And so that's, like, the problem for me, and, like, I think it is a bit rooted in OCD because there's this, like, and, like, it doesn't go away in my head, like, I need to do it, I need to do more. Um
I just as an aside, I just wanna touch on OCD for a second because I think, it sounds like you're obviously talking about real OCD and not when people are sharing memes and saying like, "Oh my gosh, this one tile is out of order. It's bothering my OCD." Like, girl, that is not OCD. We all hate that tile that's out of order. Drives me insane personally. I'm not a fan of that. So, um, for those who may not know, OCD, there's a lot more to it than what is, and correct me if I say anything
Mhm. Yeah.
wrong, but in the research I've done on it for the website, it talks about how there is a very strong compulsory aspect to it that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. It's not just, hand washing or having, like in Hollywood, it's like, oh, you got to shut the door 3 times and like patterns and habits. There's like a compulsory dialogue that happens in your mind a lot. And, especially with addiction, there is a compulsion there as well sometimes because it's hurting you and it sucks. So I can only imagine those two things combined was like, ooh, disaster.
Yeah, it was, and that's really hard for me to shut off, and, like, even now, it's like, okay, like, I'm not drinking, I'm sober, but my OCD doesn't go away, and, like, it's been really challenging, like, I've gotten support for it through, like, therapy and, like, seeing psychologists and things like that, and it's definitely gotten a lot better through that, but it's still present, and so, like, and that's why I know, like, drinking just isn't for me because as soon as I pick up, it, like, triggers all of that, and then it's just not 1 to 2 drinks, it's many drinks and all the time.
So just a couple of not so fun facts about OCD and addiction, really to your point.
Yeah.
An estimated 25% of people with OCD also have a co-occurring substance use disorder, which is
Mm.
addiction. 25% of people. And that's based on self-reporting and things. So it could reasonably be more. Um,
That's super interesting.
and yeah, when you think about that, like it's almost like your brain has predisposed you to this struggle, and so to come out of it, I think is, pretty awesome.
And it helped me a lot, kind of make a bit of peace with it in that, like, I think for me, I just didn't understand for so long, like, why do I need to drink this way? Like, why does it always get to this point? What about other people? And like, why don't they feel the same way as me or have this problem? And it was really frustrating because like I wanted to just be able to drink like a normal person. And like my brother and sister can like take it or leave it. My mom and dad, my immediate family, no one has any sort of issue with it. And like when I described to you at the beginning of telling my story about how the first time I ever had a drink, it felt like there was like this quiet that happened as well. I can kind of see now it's like ever since I had that first drink, like there definitely was some sort of predisposition for me.
Mm,
I think that when I had that first drink, something clicked, something worked. And so it was never going to be a healthy
right.
relationship.
It was like you were doomed from the start, the cards were stacked against you and, you did the best you could with the hand you were dealt.
Exactly. Yes.
Because, like we talked about in another podcast, nobody sets out to be like, I'm going to be an addict. I'm going to be a pain in the ass and I'm going to mess up my life. And this is
Yep.
going to be great. It's really, a lot of times it's so innocuous how it sneaks up on us because you don't realize necessarily that it's bad right away because it usually starts out as something positive. And especially with alcohol, I mean, it's socially acceptable. It's everywhere. There are ads everywhere. There is no escape. It's just like constantly in your face. And it's also much easier, I think, to hide having a problem with alcohol because there's that fine line of like, oh, well, like you said, I'm in a relationship. I'm, succeeding at work. I'm checking all the boxes. You're not, oh, I've lost everything. I'm homeless. I'm, experiencing medical emergencies because of needle use or anything like that. Even just using something like heroin, for example, at
Uh-huh.
all, I would raise flags for people. But
Right.
alcohol is like, oh, depends.
Yeah. And that was like really frustrating. I mean, I think so for me, it's like sometimes when you do have those big rock bottom moments, or you have an issue with a substance that is obviously like just not good because like society tells us it's not, right? Like heroin or something like that, right? Like those, um, I think so. Two things. One, I think all of us as humans that are suffering in those ways, at the core of all of us, we have so much in common and so many similarities. It just manifests in a different way. I do think that one challenging piece for me is that because my manifestation of these issues was with alcohol and also in every other area of my life, I was doing okay and kind of succeeding. It was really, really hard for me to realize, like I said, that there was an issue
Hmm.
because of the fact that I was like so socially acceptable. I was doing everything else. Like, and so that's why I think my journey is a bit different than other people where they hit the rock bottom. They know that there's somewhat like there's an obvious pivot in their lives and then, they improve or they cut out the alcohol. And for me, it was always this like, well, was it that or was it something else? And yeah, and I
Yep.
did finally realize because I had one really bad relapse where in Toronto we have something called CAMH, and so it's a center for mental health and addiction,
Hmm.
and they have like experts in addiction. They're like really, really great. One of the top hospitals um, globally that specialize in addiction, and so I had seen some of the doctors there, and they're like, "Yeah, you have an issue." So I was like,
Like
I
we are
think that
telling you with our
yeah,
professional
and
and
like,
personal
on
opinions.
a scale, right, like, of alcohol use disorder, and
Hmm.
I think that for me was the, like, last straw on the camel's back where I was like, "Okay, the only person I'm fooling now is myself." It's very
Interesting.
obvious. I'll also say, though, that they told me that and, like, they kinda, like there's the last straw on the camel's back in terms of making that change final, but, my family doctor had said to me numerous times, "You don't have an issue, you don't have an issue." So
Wow.
I see that too because I think that, like, anyone that might resonate with the story that I'm telling, like, I think that and I've heard this from other people too, where people around them will be like, "You don't have an issue, you just like to drink on the weekend." And it's so hard when it's not
Yep.
obvious, not manifesting in those ways, and you have people around you, like a doctor telling you, like, you don't have an issue.
Especially a doctor. Well,
Yeah.
so someone I'm close with who is going to go unnamed because, it's
Yep.
not my story to tell kind of a thing, but in their anonymity, I think I can say that that was kind of a similar experience for them, and it was alcohol. For them, they cannot consume it at all because, like you had mentioned, it just goes completely off the rails from there. And unfortunately, more so when we were in our 20s, we had some friends that, didn't really see it being an issue because um, this this person in our group that was, having these issues,
Mhm.
um, they were never violent. They still got to work on time. It was like all the things that you think are stereotypical of alcoholism.
Yeah,
And like you mentioned, it's a sliding scale. It is not like a check yes or no situation. Like I'm one of those people that um did I qualify for alcohol use disorder? 100% in 2020 and probably 2021, and you know what? Maybe even a little bit before that, with the sort of teetering on that edge of, is this substance abuse? Is this unhealthy? Whatever. And I am able to occasionally pick up a drink and put it down and moderate. And like, that's okay. That doesn't mean you're failing. So if anybody else is in that boat, you're doing great. Um, but this other person is not able to do that and had a lot of that sort of self examination because we're very close. And so it was tough, or has been tough, for them to kind of figure out, like, same thing. Is it actually the alcohol? Is it, I do I have an issue with instant gratification problem? Is it ADHD, as they were diagnosed with later in life? Like, is it something along those lines? Is this something that I can manage on my own the way you can? And the answer was no. And that doesn't mean that I have any more willpower than them, or that all it means is that we just have different wired brains,
exactly.
you
Yes.
know?
Yeah. And it's hard because everyone's situation is so different, and so like I think that at the end of the day you really just have to be honest with yourself. And like for me, um I think it just ended up being that it's easier not to drink because for I interviewed someone for my podcast, and she said like she got to the point with her drinking where she was like she felt like she was titrating it, right? Like meaning like trying to manage like how much can I consume that would be reasonable? I'm not going to have too bad of a hangover tomorrow. I could still function. It's like, oh, and it's like, man, that in and of itself is exhausting. And
Right,
so like,
that's just stressful, man. Like, why
yeah,
am I gonna have this thing that I gotta make sure, okay, I need to be home by 10 so I can still have something to eat, so I can still sleep, and I need to make sure that, like, what? This is ridiculous.
yeah, yeah,
Gross. I'd rather just have a soda and call it a day, man. Have a good night's sleep and also, like, not feel like garbage.
exactly. Um, yeah, and so yeah, so for me, it just became like the easier thing to do. And then I also like over the last 4 years started building a life that like really for me is not conducive to drinking alcohol. Like I've
So,
built it.
like, what?
So like I have a very, very active lifestyle. I've always been someone that has like a lot of energy that I need to use up. But the problem is that then I get bored quickly because I'm also very productive, like very efficient. And so that's where some of the drinking came in because I was like bored and things like that. Anyways, so now like I have a very, very active lifestyle. And so I wouldn't be able to drink because I wouldn't be able to maintain those things, which bring me like so much more joy than drinking ever did.
So, do you still do yoga and stuff?
Oh yeah, I do. Like I work in a day. Like oh gosh, I probably do like an hour like weighted workout, and then maybe like an hour cycle and an hour swim. So I'm
Whoa.
yeah, and then, like, if I have time, I'll do, like, stretching and yoga. So, yeah, I'm managing, like, a few hours a day of activity. Um,
Dang. But hey,
on
you like to stay busy?
yeah, on top of a full, like, time corporate job, and then also, like, just volunteering, and then I run, a podcast as well, and then,
Nice.
over the last 4 years, I've also built, like, a really good community of friends, and I think it's very common for people to have to, like, change their friend group when they stop drinking. which is what happened with me. So two things, like one, I knew I had to do that. And then also because the end of my drinking was also the end of a very long-term relationship. And I had lost a lot of my friends in that. And so my friends were his friends that when our relationship ended, I lost all that too. So I was
Yep.
starting from scratch, which is so hard. And like anyone that's entering into sobriety and doesn't have that like social network around them right now, like that can be, I think, one of the most challenging parts of sobriety, because that loneliness is like crushing. And you almost know, like for me, is like, well, if I just go to the bar and have a few drinks, I'll definitely meet a few people, like no problem.
Yep.
That's so easy to do. It took me a long time and like actively trying to make friends to finally build that community. And it takes a lot of work. And like you have to be very intentional about it. And I'm 34 now. So like I'm an adult. It's not easy to meet people and make friends.
Nope. I've
Yeah.
I've kind of gone through that myself. It's funny, I just was reading something else on my Kindle that I tend to like physical books, so I hadn't looked at my Kindle in a while, and I was going back through, and it was just this era where I was in flux, not because of drinking, but just as a relatable thing. I was reading books on like how to make friends. One of
Yeah.
them was called Friendships Don't Just Happen.
True.
And it was, talking about like third places and, a lot of times we wait for people to come to us when you realize everybody wants to be loved and accepted for the most part. So if you're the one reaching out, most of the time people are like, sick, I am so down. So, you know, just great life lesson if anybody's listening is like, gosh, I really, I could use more friends, whether you're trying to get sober or not. Um, Coffee shops, lots of third places, apps. I love that you talked about the I Am Sober app, because I think that was one of the ones we included in our list
Hmm.
on the website of like things to recommend for people. And while it was highly rated, it's nice to actually hear from somebody that's used it, that really got a lot out of it.
I really, truly, truly did. And like, you can use it how you like. Like, you can go on there and then just post and react to other people's posts as well and like comment on it. I took it a step further and like kind of like started to connect with people off the app. And so like someone had started like a Discord group, and then there was the Zoom meetings. And so like not affiliated with I Am Sober, but it was like that community. And
Right.
I can't speak enough about that community. Like, it was such a safe space for me. I wouldn't have the confidence now after a yoga class to like walk up to a random person and be like, hey, do you want to go for coffee after? If I didn't have that experience of having this amazing community in I Am Sober, because my life up until joining that app, I hadn't really met like a ton of super kind people. Like
Wow.
everyone was very like, I grew up in a community where it was very like cliquey. Everyone had their own groups. Like people were like warm and fuzzy. And so I didn't know that like humans existed like that until I joined I Am Sober. I was like, wow, this
Wow.
thing. And that's when I learned to like just get vulnerable with people, form meaningful connections. And then to your point, I learned very quickly that everyone else is seeking the same thing. And now I'm not afraid to put myself out there at all, because I know like what's on the other end. And 9 times out of 10, I'm received like positively. Of course, not everyone wants to hang out with me, but like
Sure,
that's
but for the
like,
most part, people, I think everyone benefits when we are authentic and honest and open. And, just recently, I don't know, I don't think it was you and I that talked about it, but correct me if I'm wrong.
well,
But I just recently went through a depressive episode, and it's just part of, my brain doing its thing. It wasn't any type of situational thing, and I wasn't in any danger. It was just, like your kind of typical mood dip and struggle and, executive function. I mean, the whole nine. It sucked. And I had a couple people that I was scheduling things with that I had to, I just decided like, okay, I'm going to be honest. I just said on the podcast, sorry, Kyle, because he has to bleep the F bombs, but figured like, what's wrong with just being vulnerable and radically honest and just say like, hey, to be perfectly transparent, I have been in a brain struggle, and so I would really like to reschedule this if we can. I want to be fully present for you. And you know, sure, there are going to be those people that may not fully get that, but those that do, man, we really appreciate it, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And it's so important for meaningful connection, I think, like to actually be honest, authentic, vulnerable, genuine, like all of those kind of keywords.
Right. Well, because then when you are that way, you also give others permission to be that way. And then it just continues to spill over and over and over.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, like a big thing in my life, a big theme was always wearing this mask. Like, I'm okay, everything's fine. And like
Mm.
being very aware of like how I was showing up in every single interaction and then crafting that such that like I knew the other person would definitely like me at the end of that conversation because I did a great job like creating.
Relatable.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so my drinking was like my recovery, I should say, was a very big lesson in that and helping me see that. And no wonder I was exhausted from social interactions, or like no wonder I didn't really want to like even meet new people or make friends because it was just so much work.
That's interesting. Now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder how many of us are out there that we do have social anxiety. And, I'm not a doctor, like, don't come for me,
Mm,
internet. But how many of us do experience the level or the degree of social anxiety and stress and exhaustion afterwards because we're masking for one reason or another? We just want to be accepted. We're, like maybe you have a little touch of the the neurodivergence like I do, and so you're putting on that face and you're thinking, "Oh yeah, I need alcohol to get through social events or to like, a social lubricant." When really, if you worked more on being your authentic self and being okay with doing that, which, hey, it's easier said than done. I get it. But how little you feel that you need the booze to begin with, after a while.
that's exactly how I feel now. Um, and Yeah, and I think something you said is really important too because for me to do any of these things or show up genuine or authentic, I could never get there doing it for me. Because it's like, well, no, actually, because at the end of the day, all I wanted was for people to like me. So like
I
that
mean,
was
you're human, of course you
all
do,
I cared. But something you said, which is like you give permission to other people to do the same. That's what really like flipped the switch for me and kind of gave me permission to change and inspired me to change and just like show up authentically because it's like I'm giving space for someone else to do this. And I wish there was someone before me that modeled it so I could have just like followed them because that's always so much easier to model someone else's behavior than to create it yourself. But
Yep.
I didn't have someone like that in my life. And so I needed to be the first in my life and then hopefully inspire others to do the same. And it's just so freeing and like
Yep.
I feel I can't even explain to you like how good I feel. Like I don't have to worry about how I show up to this conversation or if I go meet someone later for a coffee, like I can just show up as me and that's enough.
Right. And if, and it does get to the point where, if that just doesn't click for somebody, hey, not a big deal because there are other people that it clicks with them so much that you both feel so seen and validated and safe that it's like, okay, I don't care about the rest. You know, it's hard to get there. It is. It's not an easy task, but God, it's so worth it.
It's so worth it. And none of these things happen quickly. Like everything I am describing has taken 4 years. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's not that everyone
Same. And lots of therapy.
lots of therapy. And so like and no, not everyone's gonna have to wait that long or work that hard maybe, but like I did, that was just my journey. And yeah, it's completely worth it. And as corny as it sounds, I think it also comes with like just loving yourself because
Hmm.
end of the day, if I go out and leave my house today and interact with 10 people and none of them like me and whatever, like that's fine because I'm enough for me. And so when
Yeah.
I come home at the end of the day, like I love myself enough that I didn't need those 10 people to show that to me to fill my cup. It was
Right.
already full. That would have just
And that's hard to get to. Something that I heard some years ago at this point That you hear a lot of things about your inner dialogue and being very careful about the things you say, even joking around like, "Oh, my life," or, "Oh my god, I sorry, I'm an idiot. I can't, scheduled this wrong." And even in a joking context, you're still saying something mean about yourself. And so, I wish I could give credit to whoever said this, but basically they were like, "Why not flip the script? Like, make it like something kind of funny, like you trip, and it's awkward, instead of being like, 'I'm so fucking clumsy.' Be like, 'I'm sorry, I'm actually the most graceful person to ever exist.'" And then it's still funny, you're still making a joke out of it, but you're not, like, dragging yourself. And
Yes.
over time, that like, one of the things that I do, it's kind of from what is that? Parks and Rec, where, like, Leslie Knope is always saying things about Anne, and she calls her, like, weird things, like, "Oh, you sweet, stupid seashell." That one's probably iffy because you're still saying stupid, but, like, something term of endearment, like,
No.
changing how you look at yourself and how you interact even with yourself,
Yeah.
because you're alone a lot of the time too.
I love that you said that. And I honestly think the positive comment with the self-deprecating comment, it works because it makes us
It's
feel more comfortable.
It does, man, and it sounds stupid, but, like, something we started even doing in the friend group, that shout out Amanda, who actually writes for the website as well. Amanda's one of my best friends, and they actually got me started on saying this to others. When you notice somebody, like, saying something shitty about themselves,
Mm,
they like to point out, "Hey, that's my friend. Please don't say that about my friend."
mm.
Like, my husband even said something like, "Ah, I'm an idiot," because he was packing and something went wrong. I said, "That's my husband. Please don't say that about my husband." And,
I
like, that's
yeah,
perfectly valid. If it were anybody else, you would feel bad, but so why do we feel so free to talk shit on ourselves? And we shouldn't.
exactly, because we start to believe that narrative. My favorite author of all time, Anne Lamott, has, like, perfected this. And she comes up, like, in my head all the time, but, like, even little things, like, I'm gonna probably give a horrible example, but, just read her books. But, she, like, goes to the beach, right? And it's, like, she's an older lady, I think she's in her 70s now, and she has, like, cellulite and all this, and she's like, "Well," and she'll make fun of the fact that she has it, but at the same time, like, call herself a cute little princess that's gonna go dance in the water anyways. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And it's like
I
that
love that.
yeah, and, like, because the reality is that none of us are perfect. No one would even like us if we were perfect, because no one likes a perfect person or a perfect character, right?
True.
And
True.
so let's just fully, like, embrace the things that aren't perfect about ourselves, whether that's whatever it is, right? And, like, you can normalize that by loving it then, right?
Right.
And so
Or even, just to, even challenge that further, even if you don't love it, just having neutrality for it.
or yeah,
It
yeah,
is. It simply is. I have cellulite. I have gray hair. Now, personally, I love my gray hair. I actually specifically haven't dyed my hair in over a year because it's starting to come in and it's like, oh, it looks so cool.
yeah,
Um, Same with stretch
blows
marks.
my
I'm
mind.
weird. I love stretch marks. But let's say I didn't, right? Just being like, this is just my body and it just is. I don't have to love it. I don't have to hate it. It is literally just a tool, and it's a vessel, and I am in it. And
Yeah,
I think that's also fantastic and important for helping us love ourselves,
yes.
and accept ourselves so that we can start dropping those masks and being authentic. And we don't need things like alcohol and drugs and, any number of other things we lose ourselves in.
Yeah. I'm really happy you said that, because I do think there is a bit of this, like, form of what I'm gonna call, like, toxic positivity, where we are kind of told we need to, like, there are certain things about myself, like, I have a scar that I don't love. Like, and I'm not gonna sit here and convince myself that it's, like, the most beautiful thing, because, like, it's not,
Right.
but at the same time, and so you're right. Like, I don't believe that we need to make every negative thing or thing that we don't love something that we love, because we're not gonna get there with everything. And so
Right.
it's
But with
just
some things you can. You totally can. Like, I want to be a crotchety bog witch in a
right,
cottage in a swamp with crazy like, like gray hair and
Yeah.
wrinkles, and aging is a privilege, so these are things that like I've decided that I have kind of fallen in love with, but that might not be the case for everybody else,
Right.
you know?
I love that. Yes.
Well, on that note, I feel like we're kind of coming to our sort of natural conclusion of this chat. As always, this has been lovely. I feel like doing this podcast is such a privilege because I just get to meet cool people and, hear their stories and then become friends with them. So we've joked about like, we should rename this podcast like the Jess Makes New Friends podcast.
Yeah.
Because it's just, everybody's just so rad.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to address, or anything that you feel like you want to say before we wrap up if we haven't gotten to it?
One thing I would like to say is that no matter kind of like what you're going through, what stage you're at on your sobriety journey, if that's even a journey that you want to embark on, don't hesitate to reach out to someone for support, for help, for a conversation, because I can promise that that person will meet you with grace and pour you a glass of water and have a conversation with you. There's nothing more than that people like to do than like sitting down and helping someone and supporting someone. And so whether you do that through like an I Am Sober app or through social media or going to a meeting, like just reach out, because like connection, I do think is the most important thing. And yeah, don't be scared that people will reject you. They will meet you with grace.
Thank you. I love that. And I think that is really special too. When you consider any type of recovery, whether you're recovering from, a mental illness or addiction or, an eating disorder, grief, even just anything, people who have been through the shit that are now able to tell a story about it want to help you, like I've been there. Actually, we were just there was just something on Facebook recently in one of the weird groups that I'm in, and someone was talking about their grief after losing their cat of many years, and just how challenging that is and how awful that initial grief stage is, and me being able to kind of not so much give advice but just be present for that person and talk about how it does get better, and knowing that I know that now because I've experienced it with
Yeah.
profound grief, and reminding them like someday this will be a story that you tell, and who knows, you could be in the comment section of a Facebook post where you get to tell somebody that it does get better, because it does. It really does. So people want to help. They do.
They do. Yes.
Well, thank you so much. This has been super lovely. Okay, we'll obviously get all your socials and your links and stuff so we can plug them all at the bottom. I don't know if Chris wants me to do a closeout, so I'm going to do it anyway. This is Lights of Recovery. I'm Jess. Ashley joined us today for the 7th episode of Lights of Recovery, lucky number 7. And this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me today.
Thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much.
Yay.